Look, remember that great grand final in 1970, AFL grand final, Australian Football League grand final, where Collingwood was about 40 points ahead in the last quarter and Carlton overran them. Well, that's what the COVID-19 virus crisis reminds me of. There is one word which has been a little bit tarnished, a little bit ignored, and a little bit ostracised and a little bit old-fashioned in Australian society in the past 4 decades, and that's the word public. Public, public, public. For the few, not the many. That's what of the people, public. And what we've seen in the last few weeks, especially the last week, is a total rehabilitation of the concept of the public. Because Australia is in a great position to minimise the deaths that will occur as a cause of COVID-19 crisis. And it's not because we're special or we're God's people or somehow we did something right, but because of the struggles of our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents over the past 120 years, if not longer, over the past 150 years in this country. Because this country has 4 things that many other countries around the world do not have, which cushions us from the worst excesses of the COVID-19 crisis. And these 4 items, or these 4 institutions, have occurred as a result of struggle. One is a social security system. We have a social security system in this country which was, up to 4 decades ago, second to none in the world. Over the past 4 decades, during the deregulation, privatisation, corporatisation, globalisation revolution that has swept this country and the world, we've seen bigger and bigger holes created in the social security net, and we've seen the ostracisation, marginalisation and humiliation of the 30% of Australians, that's almost 7.5 million people, who rely on old age pensions, disability support pensions, New Start allowances and single parent benefits to survive. But it's the social security system which came to the fore over the past few days. All the government's efforts to actually stabilise the capitalist economy, an economy based on private investment for private profit, have revolved around the concept of extending the social security net, and extended in a number of ways by increasing the payments made to people on social security benefits, by reviewing the New Start allowance and allowing people to quickly access resources for businesses that have been closed, and for the wage subsidisation scheme which has recently been introduced. These are all social security initiatives. It's about having a society where we are willing as a community to support those who need support, whether it's a minority, whether, as we see now, it's over half the Australian population. The second thing we have, which most other countries around the world don't have, is a universal public health system which is funded by both state and private and federal governments. A universal public health system. Now, those of you who are old enough will remember the days when you had to pay to go to a public hospital and the distress that caused. And if you look at the situation now, it's a little bit like dental care. Unless you're on some type of social security payment or earn quite good money, access to dental care is greatly restricted, and people have major health issues regarding their teeth. It was the same in the past. Without a strong public hospital sector, not a privatised public hospital sector, not a privatised health system which is bankrolled by a $6 billion injection every year by the government into private insurance companies, but a strong public health system which is there and open to each and every person living on this continent, permanent residents, citizens, refugees, asylum seekers, which is open to people to access these facilities. Not many countries in the world have a universal public healthcare system. A public healthcare system, as we have, which was built through years of struggle, was dependent on that idea of everybody having the right to access to basic medical care. The third tier, which protects us, is a Medicare system. I'm old enough to remember the debates which raged around Australia in 1973 when Bill Hayden, the health minister in the Whitlam-led Labor government, introduced Medicare. They called it Medibank in those days, which was a universal health or medical insurance which entitled Australians to access private health care. What we've seen over the last 40 years, with successive Liberal National Party governments attempting to destroy Medicare, and they've inflicted so many wounds on Medicare that it's nothing like the system that was designed 40 years ago. But the thing is, we still have that privilege of being able to go to a private doctor or a private specialist and have part of the costs recouped, or all the costs recouped, if they bulk bill. And the last tier is we have a subsidised pharmaceutical health benefit scheme, which means that most medications which you obtain on script are actually subsidised by the Commonwealth Government, which is you and me, the taxpayer. So these are four things, and these are important public structures for the many, not the few. Universal insurance, Medicare. Universal public health system, pharmaceutical benefit scheme, universal, and a social security system. Over the last 4 decades, we have seen successive governments, both Liberal, National and Labor to a lesser degree, do everything they can to destroy these important public institutions. And when the crisis occurs, and it can be an earthquake, it can be a war, it can be a virus, it can be major bushfires, it is the public institutions which provide relief. It's not the private sector. The private sector is built on the concept of private investment for private profit. It's built on the concept of competition, not cooperation. So we are in a great position to resist the COVID-19 fatality rates because of the institutional structures which have still remained, because of actions by people like you and me, who for decades have fought tooth and nail to maintain these 4 important elements of our society, which makes us very different to many other countries. Look what's happening in Indonesia, our nearest neighbour, or Papua New Guinea. Look at these places and see what's going to happen there when they don't have these. And this is due not because employers love us, not because governments loved us. They're here because of national agitation by unemployed people, working people, people on disability support pensions, which brought about the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which is another plank in that platform, which makes it easier for us to survive. So remember, what makes us a society of human beings, not a society of people, trying to shoot each other in order to get limited food supplies, is the fact that we have public institutions which are public supported and which have been publicly funded through the efforts of generations of Australians. And if there's one thing I have learned over the last 2 to 3 weeks, is that neoliberalism is dead. What we have seen is a virus driving a stake through the neoliberal vampire's heart. Concepts like corporatisation are now up for questioning. Concepts like globalisation have shown how inadequately prepared we were for this virus as far as the manufacturing sector is concerned. Concepts like privatisation and partial privatisation of important institutions in this country, like Telstra and the Commonwealth Bank and the ports and the airports have shown us how ludicrous it was to give away these public assets to the private sector because somehow they could run the system better. Now, we're living quite reasonably at the minute, irrespective of social isolation laws, but what would happen if these privately owned energy production companies, distribution companies, broke down? What would happen if the NBN ground to a halt? What would happen if there weren't people who are willing to put their lives at risk to provide basic services to other Australians? Think about it. So what the COVID-19 virus has done is what neither you or I or millions of people in this country around the world have been able to do, and that is drive a stake through the heart of the neoliberal vampire which feeds on us for its own profits. We are at an important juncture today, an exceptionally important junction, because if we do nothing once the crisis is controlled, I'm not asking you to do anything now, but if you do nothing after the crisis is controlled, if you don't take a leaf out of the book of your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents who struggled for these basic institutions, if we don't struggle for a universal basic income, if we don't struggle for seeding funding for collectives and cooperatives, we are going to face the same problems over and over again, because ultimately it's not going to be business as usual. They want business as usual. Morrison wants business as usual. I'll give you an example of his pettiness as far as job applicants are concerned on New Start allowance. They have no mutual obligations till the end of April, when the unemployment rate will be about 13%, while the wage subsidy, which goes to workers through their employers, goes on till the end of September. They still have the mentality that people on social security benefits and low wage earners and sole traders and individual contractors are some. That's why we need to start thinking about how we are going to apply pressure, not just on government, but on the public, to change the direction of this society. And that's why public interest before corporate interest was formed in 2015. It was formed for that very reason, to rehabilitate the concept of the public interest before the corporate interest, because 4 decades of deregulation, privatisation, globalisation and corporatisation put the interests of the richer elements and the more powerful elements of society before the interests of the mass of the Australian people. We have this golden opportunity, and I encourage you strongly to think about joining public interests before corporate interests. It's very simple. In this day of the computer age, when we're told to go to the computer to get all our benefits, or to FaceTime with our friends, think about joining public interest before corporate interests. Go to the website pibci.net, pibci.net, download the application form, send it back via the net. Bingo! A gentleman did that last week. Or maybe he's not a gentleman, maybe he works, I don't know. So simple. If you haven't got a computer and you want to join, give me a ring on 04 39 395 489 and I'll send you out an application form, or you can write to us at Post Office Box 20, Parkville 3052. We want to be registered as a federal political party by the end of this year. The COVID-19 crisis will have ended by September. We want to be there on the starting blocks running. We want to be able to put forward ideas like a universal basic income for everybody. We want to put forward ideas about strengthening the social security net. You don't need a social security net, you've got a universal basic income. And as I said last week, how do you finance it? 1% stock market turnover tax, $150 billion a year. 1% levy on every cent that is turned over around Australia. A financial tax, about $300 billion a year. Nationalise our mineral resources. Bingo, you have almost over a double what you need for a universal basic income. But the important thing is, I know everybody's frightened and you're panicked and you're sitting at home and you're bored out of your brain. But that's what, That's what they want. They want you to think that after it's all over, it's going to be business as usual. What about the next crisis, the next virus, the next earthquake, the next war, the next climate emergency, or the current climate emergency? How are we going to face it if we don't have a strong public sector? So join public interest before corporate interests. Download the application form, pipsy.net, or give me a call 0439 395 489. And lastly, I'd like to thank a lot of people in this country. Not Mr. Morrison and his cabinet cohorts, which are running weeks behind this emergency. Not the opposition, which doesn't have much to say at the minute, or doesn't get much exposure. Not the corporate-owned media, which has been shown to be vacuous and actually driven panic in society. But I'd like to offer my congratulations to a lot of unsung heroes and heroines in this country. Look, I've been a doctor for 45 years. I'm still working 2.5 days a week. I'm still conducting home visits, although it is a dangerous proposition, taking all the necessary precautions. But there are people out there who are providing exceptional services. Think of all those poorly paid workers in aged care facilities, mostly privatised, who are going in there for not an extra cent and continuing to look after the elderly who have been exploited by a privatised aged care system. Think about all those men and women, mainly women, who are going into homes as I speak to look after people with physical and intellectual disabilities. Think of the doctors and nurses who are not only conducting, telephone health conversations, but doing face-to-face conversations, treating people. Think of the medical staff in the major public hospitals, which will now have to bear the brunt of the COVID-19 crisis and not have the equipment that they require because of what's happened to public hospitals in the last 40 years in this country. Think of all these people while you're at home and isolated and worried about what you're going to do next. Think of all these people on the front line who are doing the right thing. The cooks, the doctors, the nurses, the cleaning staff, the catering staff, the pathologists, laboratory technicians in all the public hospitals and the private hospitals which have now been incorporated into the public health system. And all those women mainly who are providing care to the elderly in their home, to the disabled in their home, who are taking unnecessary risks to provide that care with not one extra cent reward, for their efforts. And they are out there, and I'm talking about millions of Australians, and also those checkout people at the supermarkets, and those that stock the shelves, and the truck drivers who are moving the freight around this country, to ensure that we're all have adequate supplies of food, and all those organisations which support people who have major housing issues. We need to think of them because they are the real heroes. It's not Mr. Morrison, it's not the Cabinet, it's not the Liberal National Party, it's not federal parliament or state governments or local governments. It's these people who are maintaining society the way it should be run. A humanitarian, cooperative, community-based focus. I congratulate you all, because without you, there'd be chaos in this country. It's bad enough having to put up with a Liberal National Party government which thinks it's going to be as business as usual at the end of the year. Well, it's not. And we will make sure it is not, because, as I said before, a virus has been able to drive a stake through the neoliberal vampire's heart. It's now time for us to think about how we are going to create that new world in our hearts by influencing our fellow Australians.